Ma'am, it's such a pleasure to have you with us today. So, welcome to this discussion. And let me begin by asking you the first question. Your book, Lepakshi Architecture, Sculpture, Painting, describes the architecture, sculpture, and paintings of one of the most spectacular Vijayanagara temples at Lepakshi in Andhra Pradesh. How did the book and your collaboration with your co authors, Bridget Khan Majlis, George Michel, and John M. Fritz, happen?
Well, it happened, I think, almost by chance. And it was rather, you know, a combination of accidents, in quotes, of course, that uh, George Michel and I thought, oh, we have been so many times in Lepakshi, and there are quite a few monographs and articles on the temple. However, there is not a single comprehensive work on it, you see. And this must have been 6 or 7 years ago, if I well remember. Then we had other projects running, and this was put in the back burner, on the back burner. So it was only around, if my memory serves me right, around 2014 that we approached Mr. Niyogi with the project. We were extremely surprised and gratified that Mr. Niyogi jumped, literally jumped on the proposal, and the rest is history. And as I told you, as you know, that I worked with Niyogi Books for quite some time, and I always was very pleased with the collaboration, with the support, and with the professionality of the editorial and printing staff. So there was no problem there. And eventually the book came out, and you have it in your hand, and that's it. Of course, the temple at Lepakshi was already known, but since it is in a rather, it used to be, I must correct myself, it used to be in a rather remote area of Andhra Pradesh. It was difficult to reach. Nowadays, all that is over, because if you are at Bangalore airport, with 1 hour and a quarter, I think, car, you get there. In in the olden days, I visited the temple for the first time in 1979. It was a haul from Bangalore to Lepakshi and back. I mean, it was an expedition, really. And you got there, and there was nothing but the temple and the chai stall. Very important, the chai stall. Most important thing. And now, of course, the temple has been um, restored to its pristine glory, and the Archaeological Survey of India has done a sterling job there, so that it's well illuminated. You can go there, admire the painting, and so on and so forth. The paintings were first noted by the great art historian Siva in 1936. And they are important because, as I will come back in the course of our conversation, they are the only surviving example of Vijayanagara painting. So imagine the rest has gone, or it's going, because there are vestiges here and there in Andhra Pradesh, but they are in such a poor state of conservation that you can't see much.
Thank you so much for sharing that initial story about how the book came about. In your introduction to the book, you mentioned that the stories about the creation of the temple have been verbally transmitted. These are oral traditions recounted by the local priests and guides at the temple. So, could you tell us a bit more about this and how you perhaps collected these stories and have then put them in your book?
Well, we didn't really select the stories, but we just listed the main stories that we could gather from the priest. There were two or three who were especially kind and proactive, I must say. And so we just, you see, any most of the Indian temples have a Stala Purana. Now, as yet, the Lepakshi Stala Purana has not been found. There may be, there may not be, we don't know. So we have to rely on what the priests tell us. Of course, the most important is the story that links the foundation with this temple with the great sage Agastya. He was there to do some penance. He was touring the sacred place of southern India, and he stopped at Kurmashaila, which is this hill. When you go there, you will really experience it's like the carapace of a tortoise, really like that, hence Kurmashaila. And he was there, and of course, Lepakshi remains one of the great Shiva pilgrimage sites in South India. Um, According to the Yuddha Kanda of the Ramayana, we are told that Rama performed penance there to atone for the sin of killing Ravana. And obviously, he installed the famous Apanasheshwara Linga, which is one of the main shrines in the compound, and of course, worshipped there. And there is yet another story. This one is, how would I say, it's not so sacred, but rather secular. The story of Virapanna, who was at the time the governor at Penukonda, which is some 30 kilometers due north of Lepakshi. And he wanted to build a great temple in honor of Shiva. And as the story goes, in order to do this, he just plundered the inland revenue, we would say so. And when the then king Achyutaraya, who ruled Vijayanagara from 1530 to 1542, I believe, yeah, noticed that the treasury was empty, he was not amused, to put it mildly. And of course, he ordered Virapanna to be blinded. Now, Virapanna, being a very courageous person, did this himself. And when you visit the temple, the guides and the priests will make you aware of two red stains on the gateway near the unfinished Kalyana Mandapa, and they will tell you these are the traces of the eyes of Virapanna. Virapanna then didn't complete the work. As a matter of fact, you know that the Kalyana Mandapa is incomplete. It was a huge project, and it's very impressive even in its unfinished state. And he died shortly after. That's the third story. Probably there are many more stories and that I don't know.
It's a fascinating account of oral history. That these stories that have passed down for centuries. Amazing. Um, the Lepakshi temple is the largest temple dedicated to the deity Virabhadra, a fierce form of Shiva who is worshipped by the Virashaiva community. So, could you tell us a bit about the significance of Virabhadra and why he was chosen as the chief deity of the temple?
Well, I don't know where I should start from, but let's start from the beginning, perhaps. Um Virabhadra is one of the most important deities in the whole of Deccan, especially Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh. And as the story goes, the story is related with variations in quite a number of Puranas. But to cut the story short, there was the great patriarch Daksha who celebrated a huge yajna. And he invited all the gods but Shiva, with whom he was not very pleased for his own reasons. Shiva got very angry and uh, he took, how would you say, a lock of his hair. He threw it on a stone, and there emerged Virabhadra and Bhadrakali, which are, in a certain sense, personification of Shiva's anger and dismay at this snob. And the two of them revolutioned and destroyed the whole of the sacrifice. Daksha, as you know, was decapitated, and then eventually his head was replaced with a ram's head. And Virabhadra became thus a symbol of the contempt against the then, of course, ruling religion, who was very mindful of caste and social discrimination, and you name it. Now, it was chosen as a chief deity because Virabhadra is of particular importance for the Virashaivas. And the Virashaiva community was the community, the mercantile community to which Virapanna and his brother Viranna belonged. And as you all are aware, this movement, the Virashaiva movement, originated in the 12th, 13th century, and it was a protest movement against the hierarchical division of society and the priestly dominated society. And that's why it was a movement which aimed to reform society at that time. And Virashaivism became one of the prominent religious movements in the Vijayanagara time because of the great support of the mercantile community, who not only sponsored temples but also sponsored gurus and jangamas. That's why.
Thank you for explaining that to us. It's because there are numerous deities and numerous temples in India, so it always helps to know why a particular temple was consecrated for a particular deity.
Yeah.
You've mentioned in your book that the paintings on the ceiling of the temples are of exceptional historical importance. Apart from religious and mythological themes, they portray the patrons of the temple, Virapanna and his brother Veranna, and their retinue, thus providing a comprehensive visual record of everyday life in Vijayanagar times. Could you elaborate on this for our viewers?
I told you that I find personally that are particularly important because they are the only set of surviving 16th century paintings in Vijayanagara. Not even at the capital we have anything similar. There are no paintings left. And the paintings which you see at Hampi in the Maharanga Mandapa of the Virupaksha temple are early 19th century works. It would be interesting to see if there was anything beneath it, if it's painted over. However, as the things are, those are 19th century paintings. So we are left with this enormous amount of work which was done in Lepakshi. And what is amazing is that the Pakshi temple was practically pulled together because you must if I may go back a moment, and thinking of the architecture and structure of the Lepakshi temple, there are many individual shrines which in the 16th century were enclosed in mandapas and in enclosure walls. And this was probably, according to the evidence of the inscription, something which happens in about only 7 years' time, from 1531 to 38. Now, we can imagine that the paintings on the ceilings and on the walls of the Virabhadra shrines were of that time. So we have already, how would I say, an idea of the period in which they were painted. And they are important because, first of all, you have those two wonderful portraits of Virapanna and Viranna and courtiers, which is, I believe, here in the front, frontispiece, almost frontispiece of the book. And it's one of the masterpieces of the, can you see it?
Yes, I
This
can see
one.
it. Yes.
Masterpieces which are there. And Virapanna is again portrayed near the huge Virabhadra which adorns the ceiling of the enclosed mandapa, and that is a fantastic painting. Imagine the ceiling of 7 meter point something by 4 meter is with this huge image of Virabhadra, flanked by Virapanna, two ladies, possibly wife and daughter, I don't know, or two wives, I don't know, and of course Daksha, small Daksha at the feet of Virabhadra. And they are important because also you see the ruler or the governor at least twice worshipping Virabhadra. So it gives you already an idea of the religious uh, penchant of Virapanna. And then you have that fantastic array of costumes and fashion show, really, that gives you an idea of the richness and variety of fashions, of styles, of kulais, and all those things. Plus, of course, you can see, looking at the repertoire of the paintings, you have a nice mixture of epic and Puranic stories there, plus lots and lots of devotional scenes. Ladies worshipping Virabhadra, ladies worshipping Shiva or Tiruvengalanatha, and so on and so forth. So it gives you an idea of the times, I think.
A very rich cultural heritage there. Your chapter on ceiling paintings in the book is like a wonderful walk through the temple. You know, when you're reading the chapter, you actually feel like one is walking through the temple and viewing the paintings on the roof above you. So, could you walk us through the temple and tell us about the main themes that are painted in the various sections of
Yes,
the temple?
uh, the main themes you have, for instance, on the east side of the Natya Mandapa, which is the open mandapa with the wonderful sculptures, you have themes such as drawn from the Mahabharata, Arjuna hitting the Matsya Yantra, and of course winning the hands of Draupadi. And one thing you were asking about the social costume. There is there an interesting little detail. Small Draupadi is seated on the left lap of Drupada at the time of the marriage, and he holds her like this. And you see that her eyes, however, are fixed on Arjuna, who's hitting the Matsya Yantra. Okay, and then the next scene is Arjuna and Draupadi arriving home and being welcomed by the other four Pandavas and Sri Krishna, obviously. This is one. Then one of the great panels is the one with the portraits of Virapanna and Viranna and their courtly entourage, worshipping Virabhadra and Bhadrakali. And also there are ladies of the court. They are divided into two. On one side, the gentlemen, on the other side, the ladies. And there they are. And unfortunately, the image of Virabhadra and Bhadrakali are badly damaged. You can only see the priest with vibhuti there in front, tiny thing. You have to look 3 times to find him, but he's there, I tell you. And you can see then the ladies. Now, you have also there individual deities which are part of the program in these two panels. One is Bhairava, and the other one is Vatapatrashai Krishna. And both these devotional images are surrounded by devotees and rishis. Then you have the great panel of the Girija Kalyana. Shiva Parvati, the middle with all the Dikpalas and all the gods. And I believe that the rendering is inspired by the 12th century poem Girija Kalyana by Harihara, who was born in Halebidu. So, and the clue of the whole thing are the four central panels, north, south, east, and west, with the narrative of Arjuna's penance, the Kirata Arjuniya. And there you have that famous scene with the boar, which incidentally was the scene which puzzled me so much as a school person that I bought a book and I saw Lepakshi near Hindupur. I look in the atlas, school atlas, Hindupur. Oh, no way of finding out. And it took me many years to find how to get there. Eventually, I went. It took about 13 years from the first image to the real thing, but it was a success. So,
Wonderful.
everything is good. On the west side of the mandapa, you have very few remains of paintings. The most noteworthy is Dakshinamurti and the famous play of dice, in which Parvati seems to take exception to a move of Shiva. So, there was in this panel, and I owe this to the good eyes and fantastic photography of Mrs. Mylis Khan, there was there also a Mahishamardini, which now it's practically gone. But you can see in the book, in the digital photograph by Mr. Surendra Kumar, who incidentally did the sterling work for all that photography, that there was something there, and we believe to be able to recognize the bull under the feet of someone, which we think it may be Durga. The other panels which were there, unfortunately, the Ramapattabhisheka is practically gone, except for a spirited group of monkeys, which it's reproduced in the book, but there is practically no hint of Rama, no hint of Sita. Yes, perhaps Hanuman is there, but I mean, it's very faded. And the Nataraja also was there, and it's faded. You can see, of course, all the rishis and munis, those are there, but the main images are gone. The other thing which is I think, exceptional is the long beam on the veranda, which is on the passage between the open mandapa to the closed mandapa, where you have 14 aspects of Shiva, plus a Devi. Unfortunately, the Devi is damaged, so we don't know if it was Devi with Shiva or Devi alone. Perhaps, you never know. You can read in it what you want. And then you have these 14 aspects of the deity with rishis, all in Anjali Mudra or discussing something. And it's a fantastic array of images. Unfortunately, one section is somewhat damaged. And I hope that something happens in order to avoid further damages. But otherwise, it's fine. When you enter the enclosed mandapa, I mentioned this huge Virabhadra, and on the top you have a Kailasa scene with Shiva and Parvati. On the bottom you have the Ashtadikpalakas. And if you walk around the Virabhadra shrine, you will notice that the walls were completely covered with paintings, which nowadays are practically illegible. And on the ceiling, you have worship scenes, always either Shiva or Vishnu, but the majority is of Virabhadra. And then you have the Raghunathalaya, the small Rama shrine, and there you have on the ceiling, on the mandapa ceiling, the avatars. Only very few of them because the majority has disappeared. However, from what remains, you know that there must have been masterpieces. So that's how it goes. Of course, on the left and the right of the Mahamandapa, you have other paintings, but they are in a rather poor state of preservation, as you have the Ramayana narrative on the west porch, but that again is practically, a blur.
Wonderful. You've sort of walked us through the whole temple and shown us the main highlights of the paintings there. So such a pleasure to have heard you describe the paintings in the way you just have. You mentioned a fashion show a little while ago, and the book has a chapter on the costumes and textiles depicted in the paintings. And this also gives us an insight into the textile traditions of the time. So, could you tell us a little bit more about the different kinds of costumes depicted and what are the insights that one can draw from this about life at that time?
Well, as I mentioned to you earlier, textile is not my area of expertise. Here you should ask Mrs. Mylis Khan. However, talking to her, I was struck by the variety of techniques which were, she being an expert, she could find out more about the technique and she recognized, no, this is tie and dye, no, this is painted textile, and so on and so forth. You see, the ladies were lots of, and the gentlemen, the uttariyas are something fantastic with those borders and the various patterns, leaves, flowers, geometrical patterns, and so on and so forth. And incidentally, I'm told that there is a type of sari which takes inspiration from the old patterns. I think it's called Lepakshi sari, I'm not sure. But you have to ask someone who's in the know about these things. And the main, I think, the conclusion that Mrs. Mylis Khan draws from studying all these costumes is that the principal places of production must have been the Coromandel coast. And during the 16th century, this area was under the Vijayanagara rulers. So that's, of course, explains why all these textiles were fashionable. And as far as the kulais, the gentlemen's caps, is concerned, she found, I mean, Mrs. Mailis Khan found some patterns which she could link to Turkey. Some uh, elements of which obviously comes from the what we Turkey and the Middle East, so to speak. And the whole fashion is also something which came with Islam, these tall caps with the things. And the material was probably brocade, something very stiff that you could wear. So, but you should ask her, not me.
That could be another conversation for another day.
Yeah.
It's very interesting that these costumes are depicted in the paintings and they've been brought to life in your book so beautifully, so that we can see them in the present day. You mentioned your past association with Niyogi Books, and we have also published your works, Indian Paintings, the Lesser Known Traditions, and Reverse Glass Painting in India. So clearly, Indian painting has fascinated you, leading to your academic specialization and writing books in this field. So, what was it that interested you about Indian painting early on in your career that made you choose this path?
Well, as I mentioned to you before, uh, in my early teens, I was very much interested in India because I was attracted and I loved the vibrancy of the colors and forms, and above all, its life affirming qualities. That was something which, even in the worst moments, I think of it and it cheers me up. And after the completion of my PhD, I decided to concentrate on South Indian paintings, and I just compiled a collection of about 2,000 plus slides on South Indian murals, and I intend to continue in with my research of on South Indian paintings as long as it goes. Of course, COVID permitting, because everything nowadays we don't know what's happening.
Wonderful. Wonderful to know that you've been fascinated by India and Indian painting from a young age. And you spent a great deal of time in India researching South Indian paintings and researching the various projects you worked on. So, on a more personal note, how has your experience been of working in India while carrying out your research?
Well, I have been working in India for now over 50 years, 50. So you can see how old and I myself, I'm a humpy ruin or something. And obviously, working there, it has its challenges. And I remember in the early years, one of the main challenge was reaching the sites of the monuments, especially by public transport. Nothing against the public transport, but you had one bus that left you there, and then you didn't know if there was um,
Another bus coming back.
when the other bus came, if it came, and what were you doing at night? And I was, of course, working alone, as a woman alone, and at the time I was young, of course, it was not so straightforward. Anyhow, it doesn't matter. Once that you got to the site, there was the big problem of accessing the temple. Now, if you see, either there was one excuse or another, but eventually you had to be very patient and you got inside there. And then there was the other challenge, photography. It was always a struggle. Recently, some of the sites relaxed the rules about photography. Some other sites didn't and don't. So even that it's an added struggle to what you are doing. Eventually you get there, but it's a long, long haul. However, in some place, I must say, like for instance in Lepakshi, the local priests were very proactive and very helpful. There is no doubt about it. In other, less so. However, traveling through India, a part of the experience and the incredible bonus of having such excellent food, I met marvelous persons and I made friends for life. So, what can I say more? I wanted to do this and I'm doing it. So, in this, what can I wish more?
Wonderful. I'm so glad that your memories of India are positive in this light. You mentioned the COVID pandemic, and of course, now travel is restricted, and carrying out fieldwork and research in a remote area is not easy. So, do you see the situation improving, and are you hopeful for the future to be able to come back to India and do more fieldwork, maybe?
Well, just a few hours ago, I was reading the paper, and the COVID situation here in Britain is bad. There is no doubt about it. I'm uh, I'm very doubtful, and I fear a second lockdown, which would be a catastrophe. We had already all those months of, for me, self isolation. Now that I can go out, of course, it's difficult, but I manage very well, no problems. The idea of another span, of course, it's frightening. And then there is the uncertainty. I was due to travel to the Netherlands in 2 weeks' time. The other day I received a message, lectures cancelled for safety reason, pandemic, and so on and so forth. So we are in a very fluid situation. We don't know what's coming. What will be, there'll be a new normal, but how the new normal will be is anyone's guess. Let's hope for the best. What else can I say? But I'm sure that my traveling days will be stopped for a long, long, long time,
Oh,
unfortunately.
you've mentioned your traveling days may not resume in the near future, but we hope in time they will. And what are some topics or monuments or paintings that you'd like to research and write about on in the future?
Well, at present, you see, I'm collaborating with Dr. Anila Verghese
Mhm.
on the development of the sacred site in southern India during the Vijayanagara and Nayaka times. And in February this year, we were quietly going through the Divyadeshams in northern Tamil Nadu and the Shaiva Sthalams along the Kaveri. And then I went, of course, to the Navatirupati in Tirunelveli district
Mhm.
and also to the six Kailasas there. So I made a sort of pilgrimage to get into the sense of how a sacred site is. Of course, we don't know how the situation develops, if I will be able to come again to India soon, if the travel situation improves, if, if. I mean, the future is in God's hands. What can I tell you more?
Let us be hopeful and hope for the best. And let me wish you many more books to come. And we look forward to reading more of your writing and looking forward to more books being created by you.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for having me speaking to you today.
Thank you so much for sparing the time and for taking us through your work and your beautiful book, Lepakshi. It's been our pleasure speaking with you. Our very best wishes to you, ma'am. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you so much. Goodbye.
Goodbye.